Hey, what's up, everybody? We are getting back into the swing here of recording regular content. We get questions all the time from students, from alumni, from subscribers to our newsletter list, followers on our social, questions related to the early leg of your career journey. Typically, people looking for advice on different career, different situations that they run into and encounter in their early career. This is the kind of content we love. This is right in our wheelhouse, and a lot of the stuff we talk about regularly in our program, Praxis, with our students. So we love these kind of questions. We're going to dive in today and just kind of answer some of these frequently asked questions in a Q&A style. We're going to start recording these regularly. We may bring on guests in the future when we have a topic that's relevant, interesting, useful. But if, as you're listening, you think of a question or a challenge that you're facing in your early career, drop it in the comments below, or tag us on social, shoot us an email, playbook@discoverpraxis.com. We'd be happy to add that to the lineup for a future episode. But with that, I'm going to turn it over to John, and I know he's got a list of questions to kick us off with today, and we're going to get rolling.
Sweet. Thanks, Mitchell. Yeah, first one here is actually... I think it's a good one to start with. How do you set yourself up for success on the job hunt?
A favorite question, and comes in different flavors, but there's a lot to unpack on that, and a lot of different ways that you could take this. But I'm going to give you kind of the general bullet points that I recommend to our students about how to approach the job hunt. So one of the first things is just the mindset and idea behind the job hunt is you are trying to convince somebody to say yes to you. And part of that process is that you need to manufacture a signal. That signal is multifaceted. I think traditionally people think of their college degree as a ticket to a job, but really it's just part of that signal. You can manufacture a really strong signal, whether you have a college degree, whether you have the relevant experience or not. But there are things that you need to kind of understand about what is packaged in that signal you're sending. So first and foremost, the kind of parts of that signal is if you lack experience, you lack the formal credentials for a job, the best thing that you can do is get ahead of somebody else pointing out that you lack those things. You don't want somebody's first interaction with you to be about your shortcomings. So ways that you can do this is take a really targeted approach for the roles that you're excited by and do something absolutely remarkable for them. Not just to get attention, but find a way that you can be valuable, especially if it's directly relevant to the role that you are trying to do. So a great example, I'm going to use sales because it's an easy one to showcase a few tangible examples, is like you're applying for your average like entry-level sales job, SDR jobs, BDR, whatever the sales associate, whatever the title is. Few simple things that you can do to manufacture a really strong signal. Even if you don't have past experience in sales or a degree in sales, which I think is a ridiculous thing in the first place, but build a targeted lead list. That's an easy one without you even getting out of your comfort zone. Like go do some research on the company that you're applying to, who their targeted customers are, their ICP. Figure out who those people are, where they hang out, build a contact list, vet that contact information. That's like a low level project. Take it a step further, build out a sales campaign for that list. You want to really go far, find the VP of sales contact number, cold call him, send him a voice memo, like go out and like show him you can actually do the job before you have the job. Like if you do that, even if you don't have a degree, you don't have past experience, like your first interaction with that person, probably the person who's the hiring manager, is already that you are stronger than the majority of other candidates, because the majority of other candidates aren't going to do that kind of thing. So right out of the gates, you've put yourself in the like final candidate pool. And I think the rest comes down to the story that you tell. So you want to have a really strong narrative, even if your past experience isn't relevant. Like let's say you waited tables in the past, you don't feel like that's sales. Tell a story about how you were running your own business as a waiter. You were literally responsible for driving revenue, not just for the business, but for yourself. by the way that you cared for customers, the way you handled their objections, the way you upsold things on the menu. Like, connect your past experience, even if it doesn't feel relevant, to the role that you're applying for. And then the final thing here is volume. So if you take that approach and you are diligent about getting out enough pitches to enough companies where you're taking a really targeted approach, you're going to dramatically improve your, not just chances of success, but you're going to dramatically improve this sort of timeline before you start to see interviews and job opportunities come from that. The average person out there, they're just blasting out job applications. A lot of times it's without discretion. It's like, I see job, I hit LinkedIn Easy Apply 100 times a day. I call that applying to jobs. If you are much more deliberate about this, you take that targeted approach, you focus on proving value and tailoring everything you do to each company, like your chances are going to be wildly more successful than average. So those are some of the first things that I would recommend about how you're approaching your job hunt.
Yeah, that's really that's really strong. Particularly that last bit. I think you started talking about LinkedIn Easy Apply, and like that's like, sometimes people they might hear somebody say that's not enough, like doing that's just not enough, and that like upsets them, or like that's not fair. And it's kind of like, the response to that is like, well, yeah, it's not, and like, the job hunt's not fair. Like, that's not how it works. So like, that's part of setting yourself up for success, is totally doing everything you can to stand out. So like, sales is the best example, and I think you're right. It's probably the easiest to like do the job to get the job. I you could say that that's like the best approach, because as you're doing those things, like for instance, like an SDR job, like all of those things signal that like, oh wow, like the way that they're trying to get a job is by SDRing. Like, they're doing sales development,
100%.
like developing their own pipeline. So it sends a great signal. I'd be curious to hear if you have any thoughts on, like, this is something I've been thinking about. Let's say I wanted to go get a marketing job, or even an operations job, entry level. Like, what's the best way to signal that I'm capable of doing that, even if I don't have a ton of experience? Because I know the sales piece and it seems tangible to me, but when it comes to those other business functions, like, I know, for instance, like, marketing people don't like being cold called, and like, that's not a good approach. Like, don't cold call marketing people. So like, what do you do in those situations?
Yeah, I mean, it's just like the sales thing is like, you got to meet people on their playing field, and so to some degree, you kind of have a little got to have a little bit of professional judgment here to read the room and understand, hey, different channels, different strokes for different folks. Like, marketer, operations person, they may have different preference for communications. They may be a little bit harder to just get directly in touch with, like, synchronously. They may prefer email or text, or a scheduled call rather than that. And so they have a lot more control over that in that sense. Like, a lot of salespeople, they're going to pick up their phones if you call, because that's sort of the name of the game.
Yeah.
But a lot of times, they're just on their phones more as part of the function of their role. So a handful of different thoughts here, right off the cuff. So first and foremost, the idea about packaging value does not change. You need to find a way to be valuable, and if I'll qualify this by saying relevant value is best. Don't just say, hey, I got this portfolio of stuff that's like, maybe it's useful, maybe it's not, but it's really, it's now a job for the other person to interpret that portfolio and understand whether it's useful or not. Like, create something specifically for them that blows their socks off, that shows you can do the job. If you do that, again, it's about manufacturing a really strong signal, especially in that first interaction. If you do that, then the place you occupy in their mind is already a good one first, and that's a much stronger foundation to have a conversation about, your potential in that role, even if you don't have the right credential, the right experience. So go over the top for that. For marketing, some easy suggestions here off the cuff, like, go to their website. Go do a full audit of their website. Go get a tool like Ahrefs or something like that. Do a keyword analysis. Go subscribe to their newsletter. Go check that out. Do you get an automatic email? What's the cadence on that newsletter? Is the content good? Go check out their socials. Are the socials good? Are they engaging? Go look at every C-level, VP, manager level person on LinkedIn. Are they active on LinkedIn? What's their content? What's the engagement look like? Is it good in your opinion? Is it effective? Go read customer reviews. Go literally, there's so much content out there for most businesses. Find an angle in there, something that you can contribute meaningfully to. Do they have a podcast? Are they repurposing their content? Like, go find somewhere in that mix of like all this data and information and content out there that you can use to be valuable to them. Maybe that's creating social media campaigns. Maybe that's writing future newsletter editions. Maybe that's responding to customer reviews. Maybe that's responding to public customer reviews that are bad in a positive way. Maybe that's building a landing page. Maybe that's going and finding all the positive customer reviews and like incorporating those into this awesome testimonial page. Like, be creative, make it relevant, and use the information that's out there. Package that into a presentation, record yourself on Loom, send it, find that person's contact information still, reach out to them, cold DM them on LinkedIn, cold email them. The follow-up, I cannot emphasize that enough. The follow-up is similar. For operations roles, it's a little bit different because, you're probably not going to have as much outward-facing stuff like marketing. It's a little bit different from sales because, like, the functions a lot of time are not as visible to the outside. I think to the same extent, though, you still want to find a way to be valuable. Operations role, maybe there's a little bit higher floor for past experience where they do want to have something, but I've seen plenty of people get hired as like a generalist, jack of all trades, apprentice. Like, you're kind of a gopher. You're going in there and you're just like solving problems for people too. So like, early in my career, I got a job by literally walking around with a stack of resumes door to door, and this law firm was looking for a office manager, legal assistant, which is kind of like an operations function. Like, it's lower level, but like, I walked in, they just happened to be hiring. Like, the person who was filling that role right now was leaving in 2 weeks. They hadn't found anybody yet. And as I was walking in, I noticed that like the fluorescent lights were flickering. Because I happened to be in the right place at the right time, they agreed to interview me on the spot, which was awesome. Like, but that was like the 20th place I'd gone that day. Yeah. I don't want to, lead you astray that part of it is reps, but then it's also paying attention when you see opportunities for value creation, in the context of operations. Like, I'll get to it in just a second. So have a great interview. We get to the end and they're basically like, why should we hire you? And I told him, I was like, and I was kind of joking, but I told him, I was like, I don't have a ton of experience, but I can fix your lights and I know how to make coffee. And I use that story, and I got the job. And the reason that I bring that story up is just to illustrate is like, sometimes it's not about like any new revolutionary skill you can bring to the table. Sometimes it's just like your willingness to jump in and solve problems that need solved. And like, also your posture, like, say like, I am literally willing to do whatever it takes. I want to learn. I'm eager to work. I'm going to hustle, and I'm going to be valuable wherever I can be. You just turn me loose. The last point that I will say is the strongest differentiator you can make as a younger person who, if you can signal all those positive things, this is like the coup de grace. This is probably, this isn't always right, but it's like one of the strongest things you can do is like your wage is a competitive advantage. And so one of the best things you can do, offer to work for free 2 weeks as an audition. Like, most people, they're going to be flattered that you're even offering that. And sometimes that'll be enough to move the needle, and like, they're going to hire you. They'll still pay you. Sometimes people will actually take you up on it and they'll give you a 2-week audition. Don't expect to be paid if you proposed it, and like, see how it goes. It's your chance to prove it. But also, it's like, don't come in swinging for like what the comp range for the role with the experience required that's on the job listing. If you don't meet that, like, be willing to work for less. Sometimes that's enough to move the needle if you can package all that other value and you can get in front of the person and get an audience with them. Like, that's kind of one final way to move the needle in your favor.
Yeah, that's really good. I think that you also touched on something. I think I might have, that was in my a video that I posted today actually about um, experience. Like early on in your career, experience is so much more valuable than monetary compensation. Like obviously, you want to be making money. We
Yeah.
you live in a system where money is a great tool and resource, and you kind of need it. But as far as your career is concerned, and like the long term development, that experience, like you're actually investing. The more experience you can get and make the most of that experience, you get like it's like a you're able to get to a place where eventually it's like, okay, like I came into company A, I had no experience, so I offered to work for very very cheap, if not for free, for a while, and then I was there for a year and I learned a lot. Ended up getting really good at the job. I learned everything about the business that I could in that year, and now I came to another. Like you might come to a place after a year where it's like, okay, great, like at your given role, you're way overqualified for that role that you started out as. So if you're in a good company, the company's gonna be like, hey, like Mitchell, you've been awesome. We love having you here. We actually want to move you into this role, which is a step up, and then you're going to be making more money and have, maybe some more responsibility. It's kind of like we get very fixed on the short term, but if you can develop a habit of, okay, hang on, like I'm let's say 20, I'm single. I even right now, like I live at my parents. Like I don't have any really financial responsibility. Maybe you own a car and you pay for your gas, or maybe you have a car payment. Maybe, probably not, but maybe you do. Like if you don't, if you're in that type of position, you have so much power you don't even realize it, because you can,
Yep.
like, if you do it right, what 5 years from then looks like is drastically different from that point. If you just go out and you just commit to, I'm going to be the best version of whatever role I am all the time to the best of my ability, and 5 years from that point, like you won't even believe the financial position you're in, the career position you're in. It's just like, it's crazy to see it in real life too. Like look at the people around you, and
Yep.
they're in that type of position because they decided, like, okay, like I'm just gonna go out and do what it takes to gain valuable experience.
100%. So you bring up another good point, and a couple thoughts on this that I think you kind of stirred up here. So first and foremost, experience is a form of income. It is a form of compensation. I think one of the things that people often confuse is like they look at all of their forms of compensation as, it's like they look at revenue, like the income they are bringing in that's hitting their bank account is the only form of compensation. But there's intangibles. There's the, Frederick Bastiat. There's the unseen that is happening as well. And so your experience is a capital asset. You are building equity, not just in that role, but in these skills. And that asset you're building, it has future earning potential attached to it. That's the thing that I think sometimes we overlook, is especially when you're early on, is like, hey, I want to capture the top of the market pay. Well, there are a lot of roles where you can probably make better money and there's a little bit better status attached to it. Maybe you're working for a more reputable company, and like I see this a lot with like the traditional like college grad career options after college. Like I want to go work at like well-known companies, corporate career paths. Well, that's great and all, and like maybe your family's going to be proud to, at the country club, they can say, yeah, little Johnny's working at, he's working at Apple, or he's working at, a FANG company or something like that. Like,
Yeah.
That's an extreme case, but like, yes, there is, that's great and all, being able to command top of market wages early on in your career. But like often the corollary of taking that like more established role, if you are experienced enough to get it, especially in like a more corporate environment, is like, that's a wildly different environment than maybe you're working at an earlier stage company where they're willing to take a risk on you. The role is less defined. It's less rote, and you have to be creative. Now, not everybody's comfortable in both of those, but like your average entry level corporate marketing job is probably in many cases a lot less valuable long term in when it comes to the actual hard skills you're building. It's going to look great on your resume, and yes, there's great signaling value, and you'll build an awesome network there, and maybe that network and the signaling value is what's getting you your next opportunity, but it's not necessarily the same dollar for dollar when it comes to actual hard skills you're developing. You're doing that maybe under people who are mentoring you. So there's advantage there. But like a lot of times, if you can get in at like a scrappier place that's actually willing, it's less bureaucratic. They're less attached to the degree and experience requirements. And like you can get in and you can actually take on massive responsibility, even if you're getting paid way less. Like over the course of like 3 to 5 years, the compounding interest of that, like you may be in a better spot, even though your growth curve looks different. So the last point that I'll make on this that I think you brought up too is like you have a competitive advantage as a young adult who's applying to jobs and using your commanded compensation as a lever. Like I'm willing to work for less because I know the experience is going to more than pay itself in spades over the course of my career. In order to empower yourself to do that, I think you need to know your number. And your number is like, what do I actually need to be able to break even on a monthly basis to cover my cost of living, my rent, my utilities, my, transportation, so that I'm not totally insane because each month, like more money is going out than I'm bringing in. And now I'm stressed and now I can't bring my best self to work. Like your cost of living as a young adult, it should be low. You don't have financial obligations. You don't have a mortgage. You don't have, hopefully no car payment. If you do have a car payment, it's hopefully small. Hopefully you don't have any credit card debt. Hopefully you avoided student debt. If you're not married, you don't have kids. Not only do you not have as many financial obligations and can afford to live for less in many cases, but like you don't have as many entangling obligations on your time too, which gives you another secret advantage, which is like you can go absolutely grind it out. Like instead of 40 hours, you can put 80 hours in so that you like over a span of 3 to 6 months, you can onboard and ramp up so quickly because you're throwing that extra time in. Like that will pay dividends. That's how you can really advance and move the needle. And like in a matter of 12 months, like maybe you've proven yourself so much that like you're able to renegotiate your compensation 6 to 12 months down the road to a place that's even better than what you thought, thought in the first place for that role. So some of the things that are on my mind about that.
Yeah, no, that's really good. I'm going to change gears a little bit here to more focus more on less so the person who's at the entry level position, just starting out, to somebody, maybe let's say they're in either like first job, year in, 6 months in, second or third job, and they've been doing it for a few years. What are your thoughts on job hopping? Does it make any, and not only like what are your thoughts? So like let's just say if it's binary, like good, bad, and then does good or bad change depending on what point you are in your career? Like let's say you're 3 years into your career as a salesperson, or sales is a bad example because that's very common, just that's the industry. But let's say marketing, or you're like 10 years in, like, and you're switching. Like what are your just thoughts in general, I guess, on job hopping as it pertains to that?
Yeah, so I don't want to give you a cop-out answer and say that it depends, but it totally does. I mean, the truth of the matter, the like hard truth that I think everybody needs to hear is like job hopping without context is bad. The important thing though that you should take away from that is like context is in everything. Owning the narrative that you're telling is everything. But like if you're just applying to jobs, hitting LinkedIn Easy Apply, you're not contextualizing anything, and people just see boom, boom, boom every like 6 to 18 months, especially as you get farther along in your career, you've consistently hop. Like that's a negative signal that starts to work against you. People are going to see you as flighty. They, are going to have questions about that. I think before you're probably like 26, 27, and really not age, but like, let's say when you're in the first 7 to 8 years of your career, it's less of a thing that people are thinking about, recruiters, and they're hired literally to sniff out signals. So like it may be a conversation point, but like it's a little bit easier to understand in most cases when you're younger and early on. But I do think that the frequency that you stay at companies is part of the signal that you build. And so the context is everything, but like also how you craft that narrative and how you put it in front of people. Earlier I mentioned like it's important to be able to make a really strong first impression. So like getting ahead of those questions is important. So in your application, in the pitch you're sending, like call it out. What's the context of this? Why were you hopping around? I would avoid throwing people under the bus. If it's truly because you had like a bunch of bad bosses, like don't repackage that in a different way. Say it like, hey, I was apprenticing in this role. Like I was going out, I was trying to get great experience, and you know, I was continuing to move to opportunities where I could continue to grow and be in a position where I was learning, developing, and being a stronger asset to teams. Maybe there are some things outside of your control. Like this is where I'd say farther on in your career, maybe you've got some, some hops, and skips, and steps, and like maybe the context is like those companies were doing layoffs, or those companies were consolidating, or there was an acquisition, or like you're in a venture, in a venture world, and like a round of funding didn't come through, or you didn't hit growth targets. Like there's context in that too, and I think people understand if you give them the context, because they want to know that, like, is this person somebody worth investing in? If they're successful in this organization and there's continued opportunities for them, and we can compensate them fairly or equitably, and based on the value they're creating, and like there's a growth path for them here, are they going to stick around?
Yeah.
Or are they going to hop again in like 18 months? And you've got to contextualize that. So yes, context is key, but I think at the same time, like, if you're 25 or younger, don't stay in a job just because you're afraid that you might come across as a job hopper. Like, these are prime working years of your life. If it's not the right fit, like, go find greener pastures. You're in your learning curve. Like, go make the most of that time. The last point I'll say though is like, don't leave an opportunity before you get the value that you went there to get. Even if it's like an uncomfortable and not great situation, like find a way to make lemonade from that before you go hop. And so I'd say typically, though not always, like often that's about 12 months. If you can stick it out a little bit longer, you don't have to, especially if it's terrible. If it's really, really bad and there's like shady stuff, you're not getting paid, or like maybe you can exit sooner. But like if you can stick around for 12 months where you can actually get past the learning curve of being in a new place and contribute something meaningfully, you're going to be in a better spot, even if it's only 12 months versus like 3 years.
Yeah, no, that's really good. And I think another important thing to do during that time is documentation. Like, document what you're doing so that
100%.
even if you're like, let's say you're in like a not great situation, nothing like shady, like it's like everything's ethically fine, but it's more just like not, you are being pretty underpaid, you're providing a ton of value, like you're responsible for a lot. And let's say you're leaving like just around a year, or maybe even before a year, you're like looking around, like you need to be documenting what you're doing. Like if you're responsible for generating pipeline, like you're bringing in leads and you're setting up meetings, like make sure you're like, obviously, like you maybe can't like share people's like information. Like you're not gonna be like, hey, I booked a meeting with Mitchell Earl, here's his number. Like you don't need to like put all that kind of stuff down, but like document, like, yeah, like, month over month, I, in Q1 and Q2 of last year, I booked like 50 meetings, and that generated $500,000 in pipeline. Like just keep on top of that stuff, because that also, this builds into something else I was thinking about job hopping. If you can document that and keep track of it, you can then tell a story, and that's what's so important. And really, all of this, like the job hunt, when you're in a job, but you have to, like you're talking about the context, you have to be able to tell a story. Like, so you have to be able to tell the story. Like, yeah, like if you're leaving a company because like it wasn't a good fit anymore. Like you were doing a lot and you really liked it, but it didn't seem like there was going to be a good growth opportunity. Like you have to be able to like tell a good story, because no recruit, like let's say you only make it to a recruiter, like, and you're not actually talking to the hiring manager yet for a next job. Like the recruiter, like even if like you're a great candidate, if you say something along the lines of like, yeah, like they kind of sucked and they weren't gonna like pay me enough, and I was just doing too much, like they're gonna be like, like I'm literally not allowed to put you through.
Red flag.
Point. Like,
yeah,
even if it's right, they're just never gonna put you through. So it's important to be able to have the documentation, be like, well, during my time there, I generated X amount in pipeline. I set up meetings. I was responsible for A, B, and C. It just seemed like I maybe like hit my ceiling there. I was trying to grow, and I don't know that they were in a position for me to do that. And so I this is why I'm seeking out this opportunity. That sounds a whole lot better than like they sucked and like weren't paying me enough. Like, and I don't know if you would even tweak that at all, but I I feel like it's important to document so that you can tell a story and be effective in telling that story.
Yeah. Well, one thing I'll add to that is I think many people tend to think that their career growth is their employer's responsibility.
Yeah,
I
that's
left
a good.
because they weren't investing in me enough. There weren't growth opportunities for me at the company. They hadn't shown me this path to how I can be better and get a promotion and make more money and all the things that I want. That is totally wrong thinking. Yeah, companies should have good training in place. Yeah, you do want to work at a company where there's growth opportunities and they're investing in their people and you're surrounded by other competent peers. You want all that. That's great. That's not that at the end of the day, it's your responsibility though. It's your career. They don't owe you any loyalty. You don't owe them any other loyalty. Like your career is your responsibility. And you shouldn't outsource that to your employer. And so oftentimes when I hear people say stuff like that, and that's their cop out for why they left a job, like something, maybe it's a totally valid complaint, but at the same time, I want to know, like, I'm going to pry. Okay, what else were you doing to invest in yourself during that time? If you felt like your company wasn't delivering, everything that you hoped for in terms of cultivating your development, how were you taking your own development into your own hands? And almost always the response to that is telling. Because if somebody's just like whining about their company not having opportunities, but they're not also trying to better themselves outside of their day job, they're not a serious person. They're not serious about that being a qualm. There's probably other reasons why they left. And it's just not, it's probably signs of something deeper going on. To your point about documentation, like even if you're working at a company that isn't satisfying all your growth opportunity fantasies, like if you are documenting, you have a newsletter talking about things you're learning, non-sensitive things, you're talking about the books you're reading, you start a podcast, you are regularly engaging with other people on LinkedIn, you're building this brand for yourself, like you are taking agency over your career development. You are invincible. You want to leave your job, you're not just like starting from square one. You've built this awesome launch pad to go find your next opportunity. And most people are like, oh my gosh, I'd be lucky to have this person. That company is dumb that they let this person leave.
Yeah,
You've got a much stronger narrative. And I think that's like the thing that I think people need to remember, and like how guilty is charged. Like I
yeah,
thought this way to a degree at times early on in my career too, is like your responsibility is your own. So you should be doing everything in your power. Just so happens that the byproduct of you being that person, of like being the person who's taken total agency over your own development, byproduct is that those types of people tend to get other opportunities inside the companies they're at, because people recognize high performers when they see them. They recognize the traits and characteristics and the behaviors of those. And it's not just about like the signaling power of that. Like you are legitimately going to improve and get better and get more skilled and get more knowledgeable and build your network if you're doing those things.
yeah. No, that's so good. I think too, in that, especially for those that are early in their career, the bar is pretty darn low.
So
like,
low.
like
It's so low.
if you look at the pool of people that are applying, let's say there's an SDR job and it's got 1,000 applicants on the LinkedIn, and most of them were LinkedIn Easy Apply, just send in their resume, maybe a cover letter. Like every one of those people to that system is the same because they didn't do anything more than that. And so the bar
Yep.
is that low. If you send a cold email to the hiring manager, let's say at best, let's say 25% of the list did that. Like of the 1,000, maybe 250, which is totally not accurate. It's definitely way lower than that. But let's just say like 25%. That's low. And then okay, I'm also going to send a LinkedIn DM with a voice message. Well, half of that. So let's say 12.5% did that, even lower. Going to cold call. Well, nobody does that. Like that's super low. That's like less than 5%. And that's like super generous to say 5%. It's the bar to stand out in your career as a high performer is just so low right now. I mean, it probably really always has been. But like if you look around, people, and this isn't just like, oh man, people suck. Like I'm not trying to be that way. But what I mean is like in general, I'm just calling it like it is. It's exactly what you were talking about about, it's the same principle of expecting a company to be responsible for your career growth. Well, it's the same thing. Like, oh, well, they put a job application up and I applied, so like they are obligated to contact me. No, they're not.
They're not.
That's just
They're
not
not.
true at all. And if you just sit around and expect that, nothing's ever going to change. Your situation's never going to get better. But if you do if you do all three of those things I just said, the cold email, cold LinkedIn DM with a voice message, and a phone call, it will take up, let's say, 30 minutes of your life. Like, that's really crazy. Like, literally 30 minutes to stand out, and you'll, at the very least, you'll get a response. If it's somebody who's got a little bit of time dedicated to that job role, to that posting, and they're seeking that out, like, they'll at least respond to you. Like, at worst, you get a, hey, this was awesome, but we actually filled the role.
We're going a different direction. Yeah.
Like, that's the worst thing that could happen for 30 minutes of your time. Like, it's so
Yeah.
low. It's crazy how low the bar is.
Yeah. And also, if you're applying using LinkedIn Easy Apply, I hate to say it, you shouldn't count those as job applications. You need to like sit down, take a deep breath, and realize like none of those people are calling you back. You are not getting those jobs. You fired a blank. Okay. Cross that one off. You're not getting hired there. Move on. Now, maybe you can salvage it if you like just did that and you go do some of these other things, but like that is basically Easy Apply is please put my application in the trash can. That's what it is.
Yeah, no, seriously, it's crazy. I'm curious to hear what you would think about this. I would recommend, if I was on the job hunt right now, and it all depends on your situation, because if you have pressure to get a job, like if you need income, it's very different. But if you're in a position where it's like, okay, I am either entry level, I don't have any financial responsibility, I'm looking to go get a cool job, or you're in a job, you're not satisfied there, and you've done your due diligence of trying to make it as satisfactory as possible, but it's time to leave, which we should touch on in a second, like when but let's say you do know it's time to leave. I would recommend, instead of going and seeing like, okay, LinkedIn job board, or even like it's Angel List is one of the other ones, right? Like the openings.
Yeah, well found, I think.
Yeah, well found, right. Those are great. Like, if you're going to go look, it's fine. It's not like it's a bad place. But what I typically found to be both more satisfying and rewarding, but also just a better success rate, is go find companies that you think are cool, that you want to work at, go to their website, go to their careers page, because that's it makes the process easier for you, because now you're saying, well, I already like this company. I like what they're doing. I would love to work there. Cool, there's an open SDR job, or cool, there's an open account executive job. Like, I'm going to craft a pitch for this job. I'm not just going to be an application just in their system. Like, I'm going to actually go get something. It's not just about, I want a job. This fills that requirement, checks the box. It's, oh, I want to work with this company. Cool, they're hiring. And that's a completely different approach.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen people take that same approach and like create their own jobs. Like, they've been hired even though there wasn't job postings. But it's one of those things where you're getting, I like to call it, you're putting the big rocks in first. Like, you are gauging for alignment, excitement, cool culture, cool product, cool problem they're solving that you care about, all of that, like, importance. That's like more important than are they hiring or not. And I think a lot of people start, they let the job hunt tail wag the dog. Like, I need a job, so I'm going to start looking for jobs rather than like finding great places to work that I'm fired up about. And I know it's not as easy, and it's not always, it's a little bit more convoluted, because sometimes those companies aren't hiring and there's not opportunities, and like, you're not successful. But at the same time, you're not looking for jobs first is solving a short-term problem of like, I need employment, I need income. And to some degree, if you have urgency, maybe you have to do that and then put yourself in a position to go take this, longer term approach. But really, you're trying to solve a longer term problem. It's like, I want to work on stuff that fires me up, that helps me realize my potential, that helps me make a meaningful contribution to mankind, that fills the void. It's not like whatever it is, like whatever is drawing, your biggest priority in your terms of your career values are. Like, that's how you should hunt, is like, look for the things that satisfy those career values first. And if you're not in the position where you can do that financially, like, just go get a job you don't care about, where you can do really good work and still be valuable in the meantime. and make a longer term plan after you've got the income problem solved.
No, it's yeah. It's just a completely different approach, and it's so much. I don't know. I just think it's so much better because it gives you more leverage just in your own like mindset. Like you're just in a better position to think than the other one. I did mention I was curious. I'm also curious now to hear what do you think. We talk about we talked a lot about okay when you're in a job and like you're thinking about leaving. We talked about job hopping. What do you think? What do you think of the indicators are like? Okay, like you definitely should leave. Like I think obviously we talked about kind of like if there's shady stuff going on or like like it's ethically, um, just like it challenges you ethically and it doesn't make sense. But like, what are some of just like off the top of your head like that you think like okay you should leave that job?
Yeah. So like, let's put the obvious ones aside, um, companies doing some kind of criminal activity or whatever, like all the blatant, whatever, like just totally outlandish, things. We're going to put those on the shelf. So the inverse of this question is one that I've asked myself and one that I've had a lot of conversations with students and alumni over the years, which is like, how long should I stay at a company? And it's not always asking like, how do I know when I should leave, but like, what's a good time frame to think, what's a good time frame that I can get the kind of learnings that I want? Some degree, I think that thinking about leaving a company is maybe the wrong way to be thinking about it. And this goes back to like, who's responsible for your career growth? It's you. The question should be about you. It should be about your growth opportunity. It should be about the path you're on and where you think you want to take your career today. And like, how does this particular situation map towards where I'm trying to go, who I'm trying to become? And so one litmus for this is like, am I doing work that I'm proud of? Am I doing good work? Am I doing work that demands the very best of me? I think a byproduct of sort of that equation is like, am I surrounded by people who push me to be better? Do I feel energized by the work I'm doing, by the problem I'm solving, by the people that I'm working with and I'm in the trenches with? And then I think there's this sort of periphery questions of like, am I excited about where this company is headed? Do I believe in what this company's doing? Do my values align with this company's? What's the political landscape of this company? Since, if a company's highly bureaucratic, or it's trending that way, like that may be an early indicator that maybe it's time to start thinking about other things. But I think like the first thing you should think about is like your own career growth and the potential for your own continued career growth within the context of that specific company or that specific role. Because sometimes it's a question of maybe it's the right company, but you're in the wrong role. And I've seen that happen too, where you're going and you realize, hey, I've kind of hit a ceiling in this particular role, but there's this other function over here I'm really excited by. They have an immediate need. It's a natural next step for me. My growth can continue within this company. And so it's not always, the right answer isn't always, hey, leave the company. Sometimes it's leave the role or change your role or like have a candid conversation with your supervisor boss about how you can maybe take on additional responsibility or put yourself in a better position. How do you know when you should leave though? When you start waking up too many days in a row, not excited to get out of bed because you're dreading not just what you have to work on, you're dreading the interactions you have, you've got scheduled. You dread the people that you have to work with. You start to hate your customers or see them as a hassle. You don't respect peers or superiors. You found yourself burnt out. And I don't mean that in like the work-life balance burnt out sense, but you found it, you're just like, this work is not intellectually stimulating for me. I'm not curious. I'm not looking for ways to be valuable anymore. I'm just looking for ways to cross this off the list. And I would couple that with, and you see your job as the primary or one of the primary sources of like meaning and purpose in your life. I think it's totally fine. Like you can check the boxes. If your work is a way to enable greater purpose outside of your job, which I think that's true for many people. Like I do good at my job. I was hired for this function. I'm great at it. I don't really care if I can tolerate my coworkers and the situation, even though I don't hate it. But like, I make a good income that allows me to support my family and like be involved in my church and my community and do all the things that are actually more important to me. Totally different situation, I think, than, you know, if you're a young, hungry, ambitious person whose primary conduit for purpose and meaning and like impact is through your work. That's where I'd say those are the red flags. Like when you are plateauing and you are doing everything in your power to try and change that trajectory into, you know, a nonlinear trajectory again, and you feel like you have exhausted all resources to do that, you're stonewalled. You need to leave, and probably need to leave before that. But like that's like you need to get out now.
Yeah.
You owe it to yourself to go put yourself in better soil.
Yeah. No, I think that makes a lot of sense. Just like when you've really done your due diligence and I think you're really right though about the last part. Like you probably should have left. Like you needed to leave a little bit ago. Now it's like, now you know. Oh yeah, I should have left when I first started
before the pilot light goes out.
Yeah, you know, it's like when I first started thinking, yeah, maybe I should leave, and you've already like done everything you can to make the most of it and try to see like, okay, like does this fit into my mission? Like, am I on board with this? And you knew it wasn't, but you just didn't want to admit it yet because it would mean a lot of change. Then you know, like it's you should have left. You mentioned work-life
100%.
balance. You mentioned work-life balance. So we've been talking about this a little bit. How would you like? And I think you kind of already explained it, just not from this perspective. But how would you explain either, okay, what does a good work-life balance look like? Or how would you explain to somebody like your perspective of you don't actually need one? Like it's not really a thing. Like how would you explain that to somebody who's asking you about what should my work-life balance look like?
I think work-life balance is stupid. I'll just put it out there. I get stones thrown at me on the internet because I say this, but I'll qualify this for those who aren't familiar with, you know, what I'm about to say or my line of thinking on it is like, I think work-life balance is a relic of a traditional way of thinking about your life and career as a cog within a corporate machine where you are checking boxes. Your route through life is not based on some higher purpose or higher meaning, and you are. Let me back up and just say this. I think for people who have high agency or desire to have really high agency and ownership of their lives, work-life balance is a stupid thing to be thinking about. It's a bad metric. Instead, what you should be thinking about is like, how can I design my life and career and relationships and family and mission? How can I design all of that in a way that's totally complementary? You know, each individual component part is complementary, and all of those things spill over into the other areas, and they enhance one another, and they bring me energy, and my energy sort of allows me to be more impactful, and I can be aligned in all these different areas. I like to think of it as like, I like integration as a better word, work-life integration. And again, I think work-life balance is it's looking at your life in a compartmentalized way, as if you are trying to compartmentalize work over here so that you can have your life over here, and you're trying to figure out, you know, where you make these trade-offs. And again, I think almost always, and I know that some people use that language without necessarily thinking about it this way, but I would say I think almost always when people get obsessed with the question of work-life balance, I think that it's a function of lack of agency over the total design of their life and career and how those things all play together. And I'm not saying that that's their fault necessarily. I mean, it is, because their choices led them to where they're at. But like, maybe they're not aware of that. I think that's kind of the inertia of the landscape we live in and our culture, is that like careers look like this. And it's hard to like go start your own thing or to have agency. But if you really want agency, you shouldn't be thinking about how to compartmentalize these different, parts of your life. I think you need to think about it in a way. How can these things how can I be a blessing in every area of my life? How can these things all be mutually beneficial and leading me forward towards this greater purpose? Now, all of that to the side. If you're in your 20s and you're talking about work-life balance, you are shooting yourself in both of your legs. You need to stop doing that. You don't get work-life balance in your 20s. That's wrong thinking. I'm not saying you don't deserve a vacation, you don't deserve rest, and mental health is bad and you shouldn't do that. But like again, it comes back to like taking agency over your life. If you are fully engaged in being the best version of yourself and challenging yourself to do good work, surrounding yourself with people who make you better, you're eating well, taking care of your health and nutrition, you're exercising regularly, you're getting outside instead of just sitting in front of the screen all day under fluorescent lights, and you do that, like your 20s is the prime time to put yourself in environments where you are growing at an exponential rate. And sometimes it is going to be hard. Sometimes you are going to feel like you've totally tapped out the reservoir. But guess what? Understanding where those limits are is a good and necessary precondition of future growth. Like if you are never bouncing up against those limits, like you're not pushing yourself hard enough. It's the same thing that happens in the gym is like you want to build more muscle mass. Like you got to work until failure. You've got to do that. And then, yeah, you do need to rest and recover as a part of it. But like, you shouldn't be thinking about how can I have the maximum free time in my 20s? Work is a necessary evil. That's negative relationship with your work.
Yeah.
And I think if you're truly ambitious, you truly want to go get it, like you want to achieve agency over your life, like in your 20s, truth of the matter is like, you should just focus on working as hard as you possibly can and doing the best possible quality of work that you can. And if you do that for a decade, like by your 30s, you're going to gain so much agency and so many more options. And it's not always just age. It's like, kind of like putting in the necessary amount of time to get there.
Well, it implies the concept. It's exactly what you're saying. It's taken from what's assumed. The concept of work-life balance assumes that your work is a part of evil corporate like bureaucracy. Like that's what it assumes. But so like when you even think about the concept of like, am I balancing work? There's a level of ego and like self-preservation in that of saying, oh, I got to like make sure that work doesn't overpower me and overtake me. But that still assumes that work is from that evil place. That it's from that like really, really like in your mind bad place. But that's not what it has to be. Like when you're if you're working at a really, really cool startup, like something you're actually let's say you're working in a startup that it's a tech company that like takes old reading material, gets the rights to it, and like makes it digitally available to people for like a really low price. I don't know if I don't know if that's a good business. I just thought of it right now. But like, if you're passionate about people actually getting to learn, if you're passionate about people having access to that material, and like you think it's really important, and you think this is the best way to do this. Like, I love this company. I met the CEO I was getting a coffee, and I like started talking to this guy, and he was there, and turns out like we had a lot of synergy, and now I'm working for him. Like, and like,
yep.
Why would like if that fits into what you're excited about, why would you worry about balancing that? Like, that is part of your life. Like, let's say like you're involved at church, you're in like a young adult group or something, and like, like you see your family, or maybe you don't, like maybe you live in a city and like that's your life, right? And if that's a huge part of your life, well, who cares if you worked 15 hours on it that day? Like, I'm not saying you should overwork. Rest is so important. That's I just think factual. Like, you have to have some level of rest at some point in there. Like, but who cares? Like, you love doing that. Like, why would you be It's just like you're taking this you're taking this tactic that's meant to combat a system that's not actually like the work. Like, I can't say this for everybody because it's not true for everybody. Some people probably are like fulfilled or like satisfied with their like bureaucratic job, but like most people, like that job sucks. Like, there's nothing exciting about being in a bureaucratic job for like a lot of people. So like, I guess not most, for a lot of people. So like, you're taking a defense mechanism from that, because that would help you to be excited about like all your other extracurriculars, like whether you're a musician on the side or you really love to like golf or play like ultimate frisbee, and like you want to make sure that you make time for that. But if you're passionate about the reading and the education piece, well, like you're literally doing something that serves that purpose, and now you get to use the hours during the day that everybody else allocates towards their like soul sucking job that they don't like to be in. You get to use those hours towards the thing that you're actually excited about. So like the whole
Yep.
concept, you could just throw it out because it doesn't apply to you.
Yeah, people would never apply the same standard to things that they love doing, that they get fired up doing. You never hear anybody saying like, "Oh, I gotta figure out how to have the right passion life balance because my passion is just it's too all consuming and it's keeping me from other things in my life that I want to do." And like that's how you know it's a bad rubric. Is like I think it's a relic of this era where people were working as a necessary evil, like a means to an end rather than like an end unto itself. And like we live in a world today where like it's very it's not only possible, like it's maybe more challenging to not actually critically think and figure out like a way that you can create a career around something that is purposeful for you. It does not have to be your lifelong passion, but like that's another wrong way of thinking about it. Is like your work doesn't have to satisfy everything.
Yeah.
You can be very passionate about your work. You can find a ton of meaning and purpose in your work, and it doesn't have to be your end all be all. Like I've had jobs earlier in my career where I was fired up about it. It was like a kid in a candy store because I was learning, I was being challenged, I was surrounded by other people, I was growing, I was figuring out problems. I felt like the work I was doing mattered. It was impactful. I felt like the service and product that we were offering was something that was in demand and needed and making a difference. And you're like totally engaged. That company, that job, that was not my life's mission. But while I was there, I was totally engaged with it, and it was contributing to added meaning in my life as a whole. And I was spilling over into other areas. And like, I was more intellectually curious, outside of work because I was stimulated during work, and I was like in a good place because my work was it was a source of energy and meaning and purpose and all of that. And so that's what it all comes down to is like, it's not about, work being this thing that's soul sucking and taking away energy from all the things you want to be doing. Like if you can find a way to at least make that a meaningful, engaging, fulfilling thing, even if it's not your end all be all, like it's a little bit easier to figure out, balance, if you will.
Yeah.
I probably have, many other points about that, but caveat here. I'm gonna throw a wrinkle in here, final wrinkle here, and then we can kind of begin to land the plane on this episode for today. But I would say that if you are a young person who is married early and you have kids early and you're in your 20s when you do that, especially your early 20s when you do that, like it behooves you to think very, very long and hard about what these things mean to you, because you are in a different, you're in a different situation than like the 28-year-old, the person who like doesn't get married or has kids until later on in their life, where you have more obligations, you have more responsibilities. All of that being said, like I waited until I was older to get married, and in my 30s before we had our first kid, and there are definitely some regrets had there. At the same time, like there are trade-offs. But I can't tell you how many people that I've met who like they got married earlier, they had kids earlier, and they're like, it made everything even better. I had this additional source of meaning and joy outside, and like, yeah, at times there is a conflict between like grinding it out and working long hours and doing that. And maybe there are some trade-offs that I have to make there, but like it can be a force multiplier in that sense. And it can also be a much, deeper source of meaning outside of your day job that I think a lot of people are lacking when they're talking about work-life balance.
Yeah. No, yeah, totally. It's a good caveat. I am that, right? So like the younger married kid, Lucas, actually, he was 6 months yesterday. Pretty crazy. The whole country went crazy for Lucas's 6 months. But yeah, I would say like that's one of the coolest things about that. I don't want to go too late here, too long with this, but one of the coolest things for me is that if I'm ever feeling like lacking the motivation, I'm thinking too much about how I feel, I literally have two people who are living, breathing motivation. So it's kind of like, all right, doesn't really matter how I feel. Like I'm going to do this. Like this is like I'm staying on the path. I'm going to stay the course because like when my little
Got
baby
skin in
looks
the
at
game,
me, it's
baby.
like yeah, it's like what? Like I'm going to tell him that like I gave up today because I couldn't keep going. Like I'm going to tell him that. Like no, I'm not going to tell him that. Like I'm going to keep going. And like I
Hey
think that's
kid, I took a mental health day. You don't get, well, I think you realize as a parent, like you don't get days off. And
yeah.
I think that that's like this
Yeah.
kind of like, uh, kind of challenging thing you have to reconcile is like before all of that, especially if you're a single person, like you can get away with so much more and you kind of like allow yourself to,
Yeah.
you don't hold yourself to as high a standard, I think, automatically.
Yeah. No, and I think also too like to be their advocate, like that side of it, like you also don't realize how much a lot of times like at least like in the communities I grew up in, right? Like I was in like not just grew up in but around like, church community, like the conservative Christian world, like everybody's like, yeah, I want to get married, I want to get married, I want to get married. But like you don't realize like yes, you do. Like I'm not going to lie. Like if you really believe like that's like a plan, like that's a good thing for you, like you do. You do want to get married. I'm not taking away from that. But it's not as simply as like okay, like life upgrade. Like this is just like this was life before, now here's life 2.0. So much better. Like it's in many ways yes, but it's also very different. Like it's a very different life. Like when you're single, like and you're like when I was single and I was working at Power Locker, I could like I had so much. There was really nothing I was like I didn't have any obligations, so like I kind of could like I could put in as much work as I wanted to and be very dedicated to that and like be thinking about that and then like if I worked long and then like I wanted to go to the gym real late or play basketball, like no problem, I could go do it. Now it's like, hey Emma, like I gotta hang out with Emma and Lucas. Like I want to spend time with my family. Like I can't just be like, all right, I worked all day. Like see you guys, I'm going to the gym. Like it's like it's different. So like there's new challenges in that. So like if you're in that season of okay, I'm single and I have a job and I'm gonna be really about this, like take advantage of it because like if you like go down this trajectory, like eventually you probably will want to pair off. And when you want to pair off, like then you're gonna want to have kids. And like it's a very different ballgame. So I think it's important to recognize the opportunity you have in that.
You will never have as much free time as you do when you're a single young professional out in the world. And you should maximize the value of that, regardless of what timeline you have or what your priorities are. Like you should. It's a beautiful thing, and it's a great opportunity. And maybe in a later episode we can talk about some of the other trade offs and
Yeah.
like the decision points about like how you build a career, married with kids versus single and like the different trajectories and the impacts of that. But this has been a great riff today. Any other kind of final closing thoughts? I kind of talked for a while here today, John.
No, it's all good. I always appreciate it. I think I closed out with what I wanted to close out with. I just thought this was a good session. I'm looking forward to continuing.
Awesome. We'll be back again. We will be back again soon with another episode, more questions. If you have questions, drop them in the comments below. Shoot it over to us by email, and we'll be happy to incorporate them in a future one.
Or cold call. You could cold call me.
Cold call John.